We spent a massive amount of time on this show talking about the flashy side of technology.
Oh, definitely. The breakthroughs, the new cloud architecture.
Yeah, exactly. All the shiny gadgets that make life easier. But we rarely talk about the invisible machinery underneath all of it.
Right.
The stuff that effectively decides if any of that flashy tech is actually, safe to use in the first place.
That's very true. We tend to look at the car, not the mechanic. Or, well, more accurately, not the safety inspector who signs off on the brakes.
Right. And today, we are going to look at the rule book for those exact safety inspectors. We are doing a deep dive into a document called the ITAF.
The Information Technology Audit Framework.
Specifically, the 5th edition.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest with you, when I first opened this file to prep for this deep dive, I was expecting a pretty dry, dusty instruction manual. Just a giant checklist.
A lot of people think that.
Yeah, but the more I read it, the more it felt like, I don't know, almost like a constitution.
That is honestly the perfect way to frame it. It is a constitution. If you think about the modern world, right, everything we do runs on this concept of digital trust.
Right, yeah.
Your bank account, your medical records, the power grid, even the supply chain that gets, avocados to your grocery store. It is all just data floating in the clouds somewhere. We trust that it works. We trust that it is secure.
But blind trust is incredibly dangerous.
Precisely. And that is exactly where the IT auditor comes in. They are the ones who verify that trust. But here is the inherent tension of the job. An auditor often has to walk into a room with a CIO or a CTO.
People who outrank them?
Exactly. People who outrank them, people who make 5 times their salary, people who literally built the systems being critiqued. And the auditor has to tell them, you are doing this wrong.
Which is terrifying.
It is. You cannot do that without a very strong set of laws backing you up.
It's like having the badge and the warrant.
It is the badge and the warrant. The ITF is the global standard that says, I am allowed to ask these difficult questions and you are required to answer them. And this 5th edition is particularly fascinating to me because it is trying to catch up with a world that is moving way faster than the rules usually allow.
Because technology doesn't wait for rule books to be published.
Exactly. We are talking about how to apply these so-called laws to artificial intelligence, to agile development, to things that just did not exist when this discipline was born.
So our mission today is to demystify this entire document. We are going to put on our professor hats, cool professors, hopefully, and walk through this framework chapter by chapter for you.
We want to help you understand the rules of the road. Because whether you are an auditor yourself, or maybe someone being audited, or just someone who wants to know how we keep the digital world from completely collapsing, this framework defines the game.
Absolutely. And structurally, before we even get to the specific rules themselves, we need to understand the hierarchy of the document. It's not just a flat list of suggestions, is it?
No, not at all. Let's unpack the structure. It is essentially built on 3 pillars.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first, and by far the most critical pillar, is the standards. These are mandatory, period. In the actual text of the ITF, you will see words like shall or must. There is absolutely no wiggle room here.
So it's not a suggestion?
No. If you are an IT auditor and you violate a standard, you are professionally negligent. You are simply not doing the job.
So if a standard says you must document your work and you don't do it, you've effectively broken the law of the framework.
Exactly. You cannot say, well, I didn't feel like it, or I was in a hurry. Then underneath the standards, you have the second pillar, which are the guidelines.
These are a bit softer?
Yes. These are the recommended practices. The text usually uses the word should instead of shall. They explain how to meet the standards.
So standards are the what, and guidelines are the how.
In a way, yes. Guidelines provide flexibility. You actually can deviate from a guideline if you have a really good reason, and you document that reason clearly. For example, a guideline might say, you should use a specific statistical sampling method.
Right.
But if you are auditing a weird legacy system where that method doesn't make any sense, you can choose a different one, as long as you justify it.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third pillar?
Tools and techniques. These are just the practical aids. Templates, checklists, code snippets. They aren't rules at all. They're just the toolkit to help you execute the guidelines. But for our deep dive today, we are going to focus heavily on those standards because that is the absolute bedrock of the whole profession.
Right. And those standards are divided into 3 main categories, which is basically how we are going to organize our conversation today. We have the general standards, which is the 1000 series. That is about the auditor themselves. the WHO.
Yes, exactly.
Then the performance standards, the 1200 series. That's the how of doing the actual work. And finally, the reporting standards, the 1400 series, the result.
It creates a really nice narrative arc when you look at it that way. Who are you? What did you do? What did you find?
But before we jump into that 1000 series, there is one really interesting rule right at the beginning about conflict. We live in a world with a million standards, right? NIST, ISO, COBIT, plus all the government regulations.
Oh, the alphabet soup is endless.
Right. So what happens if this ITAF framework conflicts with another standard? Like who wins in a cage match?
That is a crucial point right at the start. The framework explicitly says that for IT audit engagements, ITAF prevails over other professional standards.
Oh, wow. It claims the top spot.
It does. However, and this is a massive however, if there are regulatory requirements involved, meaning actual legal laws passed by a government, those always take precedence.
So if the government says you must do X, but ITAF says do Y, you follow the government.
Always follow the law. You can't use ITAF to get out of legal compliance. But in the absence of a specific law, ITAF is your absolute Bible.
Okay, let's get right into the meat of it then. Chapter 2, General Standards, the 1000 series. As we said, this sets the bar for who is allowed to do this work in the first place. And it starts with Standard 1001, the Audit Charter.
The Audit Charter. I want you to think of this as your license to operate. Imagine you are a security guard. You can't just walk into someone's house and start checking their window locks unless you have a contract or a mandate to be there.
Right, you'd be arrested.
Exactly. An auditor is exactly the same. You cannot just walk into a server room or demand to see a massive database schema just because you are curious. You need a formal mandate.
So this isn't just a verbal agreement over coffee, like, hey, go check the servers for me.
Absolutely not. Standard 1001 says the IT audit function must be defined in a formal, written charter. It outlines your purpose, your authority, and your responsibility. And here's the kicker, the part that actually gives it teeth. It has to be approved by those charged with governance.
Those charged with governance. That is a very fancy corporate phrase.
Yeah.
We are going to hear that a lot today. Who does that actually mean in plain English?
Usually it means the board of directors or the audit committee. It decidedly does not mean IT management.
Why does that distinction matter so much? Why can't the CIO just sign my charter and give me permission?
Because you might have to audit the CIO.
Ah.
Right? If the person you are auditing is the exact same person who gave you permission to exist, they can revoke that permission the second you find something they don't like. Oh, you found a massive security hole in my pet project? Your charter is revoked. Get out of my office.
I see. So the authority has to come from above, the people you were actually inspecting.
Exactly. The charter essentially says the board grants this team the right to access any record, any personnel, and any physical property necessary to do their job.
That access piece is huge. I mean, if you can't see it, you can't audit it.
And without that written authority from the very top, you will face incredible resistance. You will knock on a door and say, I need to see the payroll database logs. And the system admin will look at you and say, sorry, that's sensitive PII, I can't show you that.
Right.
The charter is the trump card you play that says, actually, the board of directors says you must show me. It cuts right through the middle management bureaucracy.
Okay, so we have our license to operate. Now let's talk about where we sit in the company. Standard 1002. Organizational independence. This feels very related to the charter.
It is deeply related. The fundamental problem this standard solves is incredibly simple. You cannot effectively audit your own boss.
Makes total sense. If my annual bonus, my promotion, or just my basic job security depends on the person I am currently auditing, I'm going to be very tempted to overlook their mistakes.
Exactly. It's what we call the paycheck paradox. So functionally, where should the auditor report? They have to report directly to the audit committee or the board. We call this functional reporting. You report to them on the scope of your work, your findings, and your budget.
But wait, usually internal auditors are regular employees of the company, right?
Yeah.
They have to report to someone for administrative stuff, like who approves their vacation days, who handles their HR complaints. The board of directors isn't going to approve my request for a dentist appointment?
Right, that would be ridiculous. That is called administrative reporting. You might report to the CEO or the CFO for all the mundane HR stuff. But the standard is very, very specific that the actual work, the audit opinion itself, reports to the board. It tries to completely sever that loyalty loop to the operational management.
The standard also mentions non-audit roles. This seems pretty black and white to me. You can't be a player and a referee at the same time.
Correct. You cannot be the person configuring the firewall on Monday and then the person auditing that exact same firewall on Tuesday. That is literally checking your own homework. And humans are terrible at checking their own homework. We have massive cognitive biases that make us totally blind to our own errors.
But here is a scenario I want to run by you. In IT, really good technical skills are scarce. It is very common for a sysadmin or a network engineer to move into the audit department, right? Because they know how the systems actually work, they know where the bodies are buried.
That is a very common career path, the whole poacher-turned-gamekeeper dynamic.
Right. So if I was a sysadmin last week and now I am officially an auditor, can I go back and audit my old team?
Not immediately, and this is where the 5th edition is very clear. There needs to be a mandatory cooling off period.
Like a quarantine.
Essentially, yes. If you move from operations to audit, you should not audit the area you used to manage for a reasonable period, often a year or more. Because if you go back too soon, you're auditing your own legacy. You look at a weird server configuration and say, well, I set it up that way for a reason, so it must be right. Or, conversely, you might be really good friends with the people still on the team and you subconsciously go easy on them.
Which leads us perfectly into Standard 1003, auditor objectivity. I feel like independence and objectivity are used interchangeably by people, but they're actually different things, aren't they?
They are very different, and the distinction is vital. Independence is about structure where you literally sit on the org chart. Objectivity is a mental state. It's about being impartial and unbiased in your own mind.
So you can be structurally independent reporting straight to the board, but still completely lack objectivity.
Absolutely. Let's look at the specific threats to objectivity that ITAF lists. One of them is familiarity. Let's say you are structurally independent, but the CIO is your best friend. You play golf every single Sunday, you go to their house for barbecues.
It is going to be really, really hard to write a scathing report that might get my golf buddy fired.
Exactly. That is a failure of objectivity. Your judgment is clouded by that personal relationship. Another threat is advocacy. This happens a lot when an auditor starts actively promoting the auditee's position. Maybe you start helping them fix the problems instead of just auditing them. You start feeling like you're part of their team.
They sort of go native.
You go native. And then there is intimidation. This is the dark side of the job. If a manager pulls you aside and says, if you report this finding to the board, we are going to fight to cut your department's budget next year, or we'll just make your life miserable, that is a direct intimidation threat to your objectivity.
That sounds incredibly stressful. How do we safeguard against these things?
That's
Because we are all just human at the end of the day.
We are. Standard safeguards include rotation assignments. Don't let the exact same auditor audit the exact same department for 10 years straight. Peer reviews help too, having another auditor double-check your work to see if you maybe went a little too soft. And ultimately, simply disclosing impairments. If you feel you can't be objective, you have to raise your hand and say, I need to recuse myself. I have conflict of interest here.
Moving on to Standard 1004, reasonable expectation. This sounds to me like a sanity check standard.
It really is. Before you formally accept an engagement, before you say, yes, we will absolutely do this audit, you have to assess if it is actually doable in reality.
What would make an audit undoable?
A few things. First, scope limitations. Imagine management says, we want you to audit our cybersecurity to assure the board we are totally safe. But you aren't allowed to look at the raw server logs, and you can't interview anyone on the security team.
That is a trap. They want the rubber stamp of approval without the actual inspection.
Exactly. If you accept that job, you are directly violating Standard 1004. You cannot possibly form a valid conclusion without the data. Another factor is basic availability. Does management understand they actually have to give you the data? If they say they are too busy to talk to you for the next 6 months, you can't audit them.
So this standard basically protects the auditor from being set up to fail.
It creates a contract of reality. If the conditions for a successful, rigorous audit do not exist, you must decline the engagement.
Next is Standard 1005, due professional care. This sounds very legal. Due care.
It is a deeply illegal concept. It is essentially the shield that protects the auditor from being sued for not being clairvoyant.
Explain that a bit more.
Due professional care means applying reasonable care, skill, and competence to your work. It does not mean infallibility. An auditor is not expected to be perfect. We are not expected to magically find every single tiny error or every single instance of deeply hidden fraud in a massive multinational company.
So if I miss something, I'm not automatically in trouble.
If you missed it because you were lazy, or you skipped a crucial step in the testing, or you just didn't understand the tech you were looking at, yes, you are in big trouble. But if you did your homework, you followed all the standards, you used the right sampling methods, and the fraud was just so sophisticated that it was hidden perfectly, then you exercised due care. You did your job properly, even if the result wasn't perfect.
And this is where that concept of skepticism comes in, right? The professional skepticism mindset.
Yes. This is the auditor's default setting. You don't automatically assume management is lying to you, but you definitely do not assume they are telling the truth. You verify everything. You maintain a questioning mind. You are constantly alert to inefficiencies, errors, or red flags. You are basically the person at the party who checks the expiration date on the milk before pouring it, even if the host says it's fresh.
The 5th edition of ITAF adds some really modern context here regarding technology. It talks about agile auditing and AI. How does due care apply in those fast-moving environments?
This is where the new edition really shines. In an agile environment, software is built in these rapid 2-week sprints. It is incredibly fast. Due care in that environment does not mean stopping the whole project for 6 months just to document everything in a binder. That would kill the project entirely. But it also doesn't mean you just accept zero documentation. You have to find the balance, documenting enough to prove the control exists, but doing it at the speed of the sprint itself.
And regarding AI, because that's everywhere now.
This is the absolute frontier. For AI audits, due care means truly understanding the specific, unique risks of AI. We are talking about inherent bias in the training data, hallucinations in the model, or a complete lack of explainability. You can't just audit the traditional code around the AI. You have to consider the logic of the neural network model itself. If you audit an AI system but you don't even bother to check for data bias, you have arguably not exercised due professional care.
Which brings us to Standard 1006. Proficiency. This is the do you actually know your stuff standard. And it connects directly to that AI point you just made.
It does. Simply put, the collective audit team must have the actual technical skills to do the job. If you are auditing a complex multi-cloud environment or a proprietary blockchain implementation or a generative AI network, you need people on the audit team who genuinely understand those specific technologies.
It seems obvious, but I imagine it is a huge problem in the real world. Technologies are getting so complex and niche, a generalist IT auditor can't possibly know everything.
That is the Dunning-Kruger danger in auditing. You don't know what you don't know. If I send a generalist to audit a highly complex cryptographic key management system, they might look at the written policy document and say, yep, looks good, because they simply don't understand that the math underneath the encryption is fundamentally broken.
So what do you do if your team lacks the skill?
You have a gap. And the standard says you must fill it. You either train your people, which takes a lot of time, or you bring in an external expert. You cannot just fake it till you make it an IT audit. If you don't have the proficiency, you should not be doing the audit.
And this standard also mandates continuous learning, right? CPEs?
Yes, continuing professional education. Technology changes faster than almost any other industry on Earth. If your entire knowledge base is from 2018, you are completely obsolete. Continuous learning is a hard requirement to keep your certification and your competence.
Standard 1007. Assertions. Now, this is a technical term that I think confuses people who aren't deeply in the industry. What exactly is an assertion?
An assertion is essentially a claim. It is what the business is claiming to be true about their systems. For example, if a CIO stands up in a board meeting and says, "Our customer data is completely secure," that statement is an assertion. The auditor's job is to test if that assertion is actually valid.
So the business makes the claim and the auditor fact-checks it.
Right, and there are specific categories of assertions we look at. Completeness, all the transactions that actually happened are recorded in the system. Accuracy, the data in the system is correct. Confidentiality, only the authorized people can see this data.
The 5th edition introduces a really interesting concept here, though. Tech-generated assertions. This feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It is a massive shift. Traditionally, human beings made assertions. Management signed a piece of paper swearing something was true. Now, systems make assertions all by themselves. An automated uptime dashboard says we have 99.9% uptime. An automated deployment pipeline says all code passed security scans.
And the auditor can't just believe the dashboard.
No, that is the trap. If you just look at the dashboard and say, okay, the light is green, so we are good, you aren't auditing. You are just reading. You have to audit the thing making the assertion. Is the dashboard itself tamper-proof? Is the underlying logic behind that 99.9% calculation actually correct? Maybe the calculation secretly excludes weekend outages to look better.
So we are essentially moving from auditing people's promises to auditing machine logic.
We are validating the machine's claim. It is a much, much more technical challenge.
Finally, for the general standards, we have Standard 1008, criteria, the yardstick.
You need something to measure against. You can't just walk into a data center and say, I think this security is bad. That's purely subjective.
Right. You need a ruler to measure it.
Exactly. You need to say, this specific security configuration does not meet the requirements of ISO 27001, or it violates Article 32 of the GDPR, or even it fails to meet your own internal company policy. Those frameworks and laws, those are your criteria.
And the criteria have to be suitable. They need to be objective and measurable, not vague.
Exactly. And going back to AI, explainability is becoming a very real criterion. Can we understand why the AI made a specific decision? If the answer is no, and the agreed upon criterion for the audit is transparent decision-making, then you have a finding. You have a failure.
Okay, that wraps up the general standards. We know who we are. We have our charter. We are independent, skilled, and skeptical. Now we move to Chapter 3. Performance standards, the 1200 series. This is the how. We are rolling up our sleeves and actually doing the work.
And it starts with arguably the most important concept in modern auditing, Standard 1201, risk assessment and planning.
Why is this first? Why not just start auditing the systems right away?
Because you cannot audit everything. It is physically impossible. You have limited time, a limited budget, and a limited number of people. So you have to audit what actually matters. You have to use a risk-based approach.
We often talk about the audit universe. That's the list of everything that could potentially be audited, right?
Right. Every single server, every application, every business process, every third-party vendor, that is the universe. It is huge. You have to filter that massive list through a risk assessment to decide what to target this year. You have to be a sniper, not a carpet bomber.
Let's break down the audit risk model, because there are three components that balance each other here: inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. These sound academic, but they are very practical. Let's start with inherent risk.
Inherent risk is the risk naturally present in the activity, completely ignoring any security controls you might have. It's the how inherently dangerous is this beast variable. For example, a bank's global wire transfer system has extremely high inherent risk. It moves billions of dollars. If it breaks or gets hacked, real money is lost instantly.
Compare that to, I don't know, the employee cafeteria menu website.
Very low inherent risk. If the menu site gets hacked, people might not know it is Taco Tuesday. It is annoying, but the bank does not collapse. So inherent risk drives where you look first. You look at the wire transfers, not the tacos.
Then we have control risk.
That is the risk that the company's internal defenses failed to stop a problem. So wire transfer system has high inherent risk, but maybe they have biometric scanners, dual approval requirements for every transaction, and an AI fraud detection engine. Those are controls. If those controls are poorly designed or easily bypassed, your control risk is high.
So if I have high inherent risk because it's a bank and high control risk because the guards are essentially asleep, I have a massive problem.
A massive problem. And that leads to the final variable, detection risk. That is the risk on us, the auditors. It is the risk that there is a huge problem, but our audit procedures somehow miss it.
How do we manage that on our end?
We do more work. If inherent risk is high and control risk is high, we have to do a lot of testing to lower the detection risk. We look at much larger data samples, we do more interviews, we run more complex scripts. We need to be damn sure we catch the issue.
The standard also mentions pervasive versus detailed controls.
Pervasive controls are things like the overall culture of the company. If the culture from the top down is, we don't really care about security, we just want to launch products fast, that is a pervasive weakness. It acts like a negative multiplier. It makes the detailed controls, like a specific firewall rule, much less reliable, because someone will probably just turn the firewall off or bypass it to get their job done faster.
Moving to Standard 1202, audit scheduling. This used to be simple, right? You just make a calendar for the year. But ITA 5th edition talks about agility again.
The old way was literally, in January, we audit Windows servers. In June, we audit Linux. You set the plan in stone and ignored everything else. But the world doesn't work like that anymore. What if a massive new cyber threat appears in March? Like when the Log4j vulnerability hit? Or what if a massive new privacy regulation drops in April?
If you stick to your rigid January plan, you are basically ignoring the house burning down in March.
Exactly. So the schedule needs to be dynamic. The standard encourages maintaining a backlog of potential audits, continuously prioritized by risk, just like in agile software development.
So you are reevaluating constantly.
Yes. If the risk profile of the company changes, you pull a different audit from the top of the backlog. You might delay a routine, low-risk compliance check to handle an urgent, high-risk cybersecurity review. The audit plan has to be a living document.
Standard 1203. Engagement planning. This is about planning the specific battle. Once you pick the audit off the backlog, how do you prep?
You define the scope, the specific objectives, and the resources you need. And here, we talk about materiality again. This is a concept borrowed heavily from financial auditing, but it's applied to IT.
Materiality is basically deciding what actually matters.
Yes.
Yeah.
In finance, if you are off by 10 cents on a balance sheet, nobody cares. It is not material. If you are off by $10 million, it is material. In IT, materiality is often about data sensitivity or system criticality.
Give me a practical IT example.
If you are auditing a massive marketing database, the specific table containing the personally identifiable information, the PII, the social security numbers, the health data is highly material. The table containing just a list of zip codes is far less material. You focus your energy on the material items. You do not waste your limited time checking the zip codes if the social security numbers are sitting right there exposed.
And compliance is a mandatory part of this planning phase.
You absolutely must check against laws and regulations. You cannot ignore GDPR or HAPA or CCPA if they apply to the data. That is a non-negotiable part of the plan. You cannot legally plan an audit that willfully ignores the law.
Standard 1204. Performance and supervision. This sounds like pretty basic management stuff to me.
It is, but it is critical because auditors are often working in very small teams or even alone in the field. Junior auditors need strict oversight. You cannot just send a brand new hire out to audit the core mainframe and hope for the best.
It is the 4 eyes principle.
Yes, every single task needs a review. A senior supervisor needs to check the work to ensure the logic actually holds up.
And documentation. The old saying, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen.
That is the golden rule of auditing. Your work papers must be detailed enough that a complete stranger, another competent auditor, could come in, read your notes, repeat your exact steps, and arrive at the exact same result. It is all about reproducibility. If you just write down, check the server, look good to me, that is a massive fail.
The standard also mentions root cause analysis. I really love this concept. It's about not just reporting the surface level symptom.
It's crucial. Imagine you find a server that hasn't been patched in a year. That is a symptom. If you report server X is unpatched, management will go patch it. Great. But next month, another server will be unpatched.
You're just playing whack-a-mole at that point.
Exactly. But if you do a root cause analysis, you might find out, oh, there is no automated patch management policy in the company. If you report that root cause and they fix the policy, you solve the problem for every single server forever. That is where internal auditors add real, lasting value.
Now, let's talk about the smoking gun. Standard 1205. Evidence. This is the core of the whole investigation. You need proof.
And not just any proof. The standard explicitly says evidence must be sufficient and appropriate. Sufficient means you have enough of it to spot a real pattern, not just an anomaly. Appropriate means it is actually relevant and reliable.
Talk to me about the hierarchy of reliability. Because I think lay people assume all evidence is created equal. But the ITF has this ladder of truth, right?
It does, and this is exactly where rookie auditors get eaten alive by management. At the bottom of the ladder, the lowest possible reliability is inquiry.
Which is just asking someone a question.
Yes. Hey, do you change your passwords every 90 days? And they say yes. That is incredibly weak evidence. People lie. People forget. People think they did it but didn't. If your entire audit report is based only on what people told you in interviews, you have failed the standard.
So we climb the ladder. What is next?
Documentary evidence, system logs, screenshots, written policies. That is definitely better. But even documents can be faked, or they might be outdated.
So what is the absolute gold standard, the top of the ladder?
Observation and reperformance. Observation is physically watching the process happen in real time. Don't just tell me you do backups. Sit down and let me watch you run the backup right now. Reperformance is even better than that. Give me the raw data and I will run the complex calculation myself on my own machine to see if I get the exact same number you did.
That feels a little adversarial though, doesn't it? I don't trust your screenshot.
It is not about personal trust. It goes back to that professional skepticism we talked about earlier. Your job isn't to be their friend. Your job is to be right.
With digital evidence, we really have to worry about integrity now. Can the logs just be faked?
That is a huge issue in modern IT. If the system administrator can edit the logs that track their own activity, those logs are entirely worthless as evidence. That is why we look for immutable logs. Logs that are written to a write once, read many drive, a warm drive. They cannot be altered. And we always prefer external evidence. A bank statement sent directly from the bank to the auditor is infinitely better than a spreadsheet the finance manager emails you, because the manager could have easily edited the spreadsheet.
Standard 1206. Using the work of other experts. We touched on this briefly in proficiency. This is about calling for backup when you're out of your depth.
Sometimes you need a mercenary. Maybe you need a specialized white hat hacker for a deep penetration test, or an actuary, or a complex AI model validator.
But the standard says you can't just blindly trust the report.
No. You are still the one responsible for the final audit opinion. So you have to vet them. Are they truly independent? Are they competent? You have to review their methodology. You don't have to be a world-class expert in their specific field, but you have to understand enough to know if their work is rigorous or if it's garbage.
This also covers SOC reports, right? We hear about SOC 2 compliance all the time.
Yes, this is crucial for the cloud era. If your company uses Amazon Web Services, you cannot go audit Amazon's data centers. They will not let you in the door. They have too many customers. But you can get their SOC 2 report, which is a massive audit done by an independent firm. Standard 1206 guides how you rely on that report instead of doing the work yourself. It tells you how to read it and verify it actually covers the controls you care about.
Finally, for performance standards, Standard 1207. Irregularities and illegal acts. The fraud factor.
This is a very delicate one. The standard actually starts with a disclaimer. Auditors are not police. We are not forensic fraud investigators. We cannot guarantee we will find all fraud.
But you can't just ignore it if you trip over it.
No. We must be alert. We have to actively look for red flags. Things like management constantly overriding control, saying, just do it, I'm the CEO. Or missing financial records. Or strange high-value transactions happening at 3 in the morning.
And if we do see something, do we call the cops?
Usually not immediately. We investigate the impact of the anomaly, and we inform the right people internally, usually the governance board or legal counsel. We don't confront the suspect in the hallway with handcuffs. We report it up the chain so the company can deal with it legally and properly.
All right, so we've done the work. We've planned, we've gathered evidence, we've found some real issues. Now we need to tell someone. Chapter 4, Reporting Standards, the 1400 series, starting with Standard 1401.
Reporting.
The final deliverable. This is what the board of directors actually sees. They don't look at your messy work papers. They see the final report. It must clearly state the scope, the standards used, saying we followed ITAF and the specific findings.
And the opinion. This is the real bottom line. There are generally 3 flavors of opinion you can issue. Unqualified means everything is good. The controls are working effectively. It is a clean bill of health.
Which is such confusing terminology.
Yeah.
Unqualified sounds bad in plain English, like you aren't qualified for this job.
I know, it's a terrible term for lay people. In audit speak, unqualified means without any reservation. It is the best grade you can possibly get. Then you have qualified. That means the environment is mostly good, but there are some specific issues or qualifications, like everything is great, except the password policy is terrible.
And the third one?
Adverse. Major systemic failure. The controls are simply not working. The system is not trustworthy. This is the giant red alert to the board.
What if you couldn't check something, like that scenario earlier where management hid the data from you?
Then you issue a scope limitation. You explicitly write in the report, we cannot express an opinion on this area because management denied us access. That is a massive red flag to the board.
Yeah.
It usually gets people fired.
And recommendations. They can't just be complaints, right?
They must be actionable and constructive. And crucially, the final report should include management's response. The auditor says, fix this, and management writes, we agree, and we will fix it by Tuesday. That commitment needs to be permanently on the record.
Last standard, 1402.
Follow-up activities.
So the audit isn't actually over when the report is emailed out.
No. You have to go back and check. Did they actually fix it by Tuesday like they promised? That is verification. We call it closing the loop. If you don't follow up, the entire audit was a waste of time.
But here is a tricky scenario. What if they reply and say, we aren't going to fix it, it's too expensive, we just accept the risk?
That is actually allowed. Management ultimately owns the risk, not the auditor. If fixing a $10,000 problem costs $1 million in new software, they absolutely should accept the risk. It is a valid business decision.
But what if the risk is huge? What if they are accepting a risk that could literally destroy the entire company?
Then the auditor has a fundamental duty to escalate. You go directly to the board. You say, the CEO is actively accepting a risk that is far higher than the company's stated risk appetite. The board then decides. But the auditor's job is to ensure that risk isn't just accepted in the shadows by one manager. We shine the light on it.
Wow. We have really walked the entire path here today. From the charter that gives you the right to even exist, through the independence that keeps you honest, the planning and risk assessment that focuses your work, the evidence gathering, all the way to the final report and the follow-up.
It is a rigorous journey, and that is exactly the point. IT theft turns IT auditing from a subjective art where I just say, I think your security looks okay, into a highly defensible science.
It really highlights that audits aren't just gotcha moments. They serve a real purpose.
They are about assurance. In a digital world, we desperately need to know that the systems running our finances, our hospitals, our communications are actually resilient. We need to trust them. And you simply cannot trust what you do not rigorously check.
I want to leave the listeners with a final thought to mull over. We talked earlier about AI making its own assertions. As systems become more fully automated, the human auditor's role is shifting. We aren't just checking boxes on a clipboard anymore. We are evaluating the logic of the machines themselves. But what happens when the machines get so complex that we start using AI to audit the AI?
Auditing the auditor AI.
Exactly. Who checks the logic of the algorithmic safety inspector? Are we ready for a world where the ITF criteria are being applied by a neural network instead of human? That is something that isn't in the 5th edition yet, but it's definitely something every professional needs to start thinking about.
It's a fascinating problem.
Well, a huge thank you to our expert for breaking all of this down so clearly, and thank you to you for listening to this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.